The boy with the broken bicycle. The sun dipped low in the sky, painting the horizon with hues of orange and purple. On the edge of a quiet suburban neighborhood, a boy named Ethan pedaled his rusty old bicycle down a cracked sidewalk. His bike was far from perfect. It wobbled with every turn, the tires squeaked, and the chain often slipped off the gears. But it was his only mode of transportation, and he cherished it. Ethan was only 12 years old, but he carried responsibilities far beyond his years. His single mother, Anna, worked double shifts at the diner across town to keep a roof over their heads. To help out, Ethan delivered newspapers in the mornings before school and ran small errands for neighbors in the evenings. It wasn't much, but it made a difference. One chilly autumn evening, as Ethan was returning home from a delivery, disaster struck. He was riding along a dimly lit street when a loud snap echoed through the air. His bike wobbled violently before the chain came loose, sending him tumbling to the ground. Ethan scraped his knee badly, and tears welled up in his eyes, not from the pain, but from the frustration. His bike was beyond repair, and he couldn't afford a new one. Ethan sat on the curb, staring at the broken chain and bent wheel. He thought of his mom and how hard she worked. "I can't ask her for money," he whispered to himself. "She's already doing so much." As he sat there, lost in thought, an older man with a kind face approached. His name was Mr. Harris, a retired mechanic who lived a few streets over. "Hey there, son," he said, kneeling down to inspect the bike. "Looks like you've had a rough day." Ethan hesitated before nodding. "My bike's broken, and I need it for my paper route," he admitted. "I don't know what to do." Mr. Harris smiled warmly. "Well, let's see what we can do about that. Bring it over to my garage tomorrow after school, and we'll take a look." Ethan's eyes lit up with hope. "Really? You'd help me fix it?" "Of course," Mr. Harris replied. "Sometimes all we need is a little help from someone who's been there before." The next day, true to his word, Ethan showed up at Mr. Harris's garage with his broken bike in tow. The garage was a treasure trove of tools, spare parts, and half-finished projects. It smelled of oil and sawdust, a comforting mix that made Ethan feel at ease. For hours, they worked side by side. Mr. Harris taught Ethan how to replace the chain, tighten the brakes, and even straighten the bent wheel. Ethan listened intently, soaking up every bit of knowledge. By the time they were finished, the bike looked almost new. Mr. Harris even added a bell and a small headlight for good measure. "Thank you so much," Ethan said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I don't know how to repay you." "You don't need to repay me, son," Mr. Harris replied. "Just promise me one thing. When you see someone else in need, help them if you can." Ethan nodded solemnly. "I promise." The next morning, Ethan set out on his paper route with a newfound sense of pride and determination. His bike glided smoothly over the pavement, the bell chiming cheerfully as he passed by. As he delivered newspapers to his neighbors, he noticed something he hadn't before: the little acts of kindness happening all around him. An elderly woman struggled to carry her groceries up her porch steps, but a young man stopped to lend a hand. A group of kids played basketball in the park, and when one boy fell, another helped him up and dusted him off. A stray dog wandered near the convenience store, and the owner set out a bowl of water and some scraps. Ethan realized that kindness wasn't always about grand gestures. It was in the small, everyday moments that often went unnoticed. Inspired, he decided to start his own chain of kindness, just as Mr. Harris had suggested. That afternoon, as he rode home, Ethan spotted a girl from his school, Lily, sitting on the curb with a forlorn expression. Her bike lay beside her, the front tire flat. Without hesitation, Ethan stopped. "Need some help?" he asked. Lily looked up, surprised. "Yeah, I got a flat tire, and I don't know how to fix it." Ethan smiled. "I've got some tools at home. Let's fix it together." They worked side by side, just as Ethan had with Mr. Harris. As they patched up the tire, Ethan shared the story of how Mr. Harris had helped him. Lily listened intently, a smile spreading across her face. "You know," she said, "this makes me want to help someone else too." And so, the chain of kindness grew. Lily helped a younger student who had dropped her books in the hallway. That student, in turn, helped her neighbor carry in her groceries. The acts of kindness rippled through the community, touching lives in ways no one could have imagined. But the story didn't end there. A few weeks later, Ethan returned to Mr. Harris's garage with a surprise. He had saved up his earnings from his paper route and bought a small potted plant. "This is for you," he said, handing it to Mr. Harris, "for teaching me how to fix my bike and for showing me the power of kindness." Mr. Harris's eyes glistened with tears as he accepted the gift. "Thank you, Ethan. You've got a good heart." Ethan grinned. "You taught me that." As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Ethan rode his bike home, his heart full. He knew that no matter how tough life got, there would always be people willing to lend a helping hand, and he vowed to be one of them. The forgotten wallet. The afternoon was bustling in the city's central market, a vibrant place filled with the hum of life. Vendors called out their wares: fresh vegetables, fragrant spices, and handcrafted goods. People moved through the narrow aisles, their arms laden with bags, their faces a mixture of focus and fatigue. Among them was Grace, a young woman in her early 20s. She worked as a cashier at a nearby grocery store, and today was her one day off. She had come to the market to find something special, a gift for her mother's upcoming birthday. As she browsed through colorful scarves and delicate jewelry, Grace felt a rare sense of joy. Her mother, who had raised her single-handedly, deserved something beautiful. Grace finally selected a hand-painted ceramic vase, its intricate blue and white patterns reminiscent of the stories her mother used to tell her about their cultural heritage. She paid the vendor and tucked the vase carefully into her bag, a satisfied smile on her face. As she walked toward the bus stop, something on the ground caught her eye: a weathered leather wallet, its edges scuffed and worn from years of use. She picked it up and glanced around, hoping to spot its owner, but no one seemed to notice. The wallet was surprisingly heavy, and when she opened it, she found a thick wad of cash alongside an assortment of credit cards and an ID. The ID belonged to an elderly man named Richard Matthews. His picture showed a kind face, his eyes crinkled with the traces of countless smiles. Grace's first thought was how much this wallet must mean to him. The cash alone could be his life savings, and losing it would be devastating. Her mind raced with possibilities. Should she turn it into the police? What if it got lost in the bureaucracy? Could she find Richard herself? She decided on the latter. The address on the ID wasn't far from the market, and she felt a deep sense of urgency to return it to its rightful owner. Grace flagged down a taxi, clutching the wallet tightly as if it might disappear. When the driver asked her destination, she gave Richard's address, explaining the situation. The driver, a jovial man named Sam, nodded approvingly. "Not many people would go out of their way like this," he said. "You're doing a good thing." When they arrived at the address, Grace stepped out of the cab and found herself in front of a modest brick house with a neatly kept garden. She hesitated for a moment before ringing the doorbell. Moments later, the door creaked open, and there stood Richard Matthews. His face was even kinder in person, though it was etched with the lines of age and worry. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice tinged with weariness. Grace held out the wallet. "I found this at the market. It belongs to you, doesn't it?" Richard's eyes widened in shock. He took the wallet with trembling hands and opened it, his expression shifting from disbelief to overwhelming relief. I can't believe this. I thought it was gone forever." "Thank you, young lady. You have no idea what this means to me." Curious, Grace asked, "Why were you carrying so much cash?" "It's not safe." Richard sighed, inviting her to sit on the porch. "I was on my way to pay a deposit for my grandson's surgery. He's only 8 years old and needs a heart operation. It's been a struggle to gather the money, but we finally managed. When I realized the wallet was gone, I thought I'd failed him." Grace's heart sank. She couldn't imagine the weight Richard must have been carrying. "I'm so glad I found it before anything bad happened," she said. Richard looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and awe. "You're a rare soul. Most people wouldn't bother to return it, especially with that much cash inside. You've saved my grandson's life." As they spoke, a boy's voice called from inside the house. "Grandpa, who's there?" A small boy appeared in the doorway, his thin frame and pale complexion evidence of his illness. Despite his condition, he wore a bright smile. "Hi," he said shyly, waving at Grace. Grace waved back, her heart swelling with emotion. She introduced herself and spent the next hour talking with Richard and his grandson, Annie. She learned about their struggles, their hopes, and the love that held their small family together. When she finally stood to leave, Richard stopped her. "Wait," he said, disappearing into the house. He returned with a small, hand-carved wooden figurine, a dove with outstretched wings. "This is for you. I made it myself. It's not much, but it's my way of saying thank you." Grace accepted the gift, tears pricking her eyes. "It's beautiful. Thank you." As she walked away, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had set out that day to find a gift for her mother, but had gained so much more. A reminder of the power of kindness and the connections that bind us all. 2 weeks later, Grace received an unexpected visitor at the grocery store where she worked. It was Richard, holding a small envelope. "I wanted to give you this," he said, handing it to her. Inside was a photograph of Danny, beaming in his hospital gown, with the words, "Thank you for being our angel," written on the back. Accompanying the photo was a handwritten note from Richard. "Danny's surgery was a success. Your kindness gave him a second chance at life." Grace clutched the photo to her chest, her eyes brimming with tears. She realized that her small act of returning the wallet had set off a ripple of hope and gratitude that would last a lifetime. The Midnight Rescuers. It was a cold winter night, and the streets were eerily quiet, save for the soft crunch of snow beneath hurried footsteps. A heavy storm was forecasted, and most people were either safe in their homes or rushing to get there. The icy wind howled through the city, rattling windows and bending tree branches. On the outskirts of town, an old bridge stretched across a frozen river. Its once sturdy beams were now weathered and creaked ominously under pressure. Few dared to use the bridge, especially on nights like this, when visibility was low and the ice below threatened to crack with the slightest disturbance. A cry for help. Sam and Mia, a young couple in their late 20s, were returning home from a holiday gathering when they decided to take the bridge to save time. Sam drove cautiously, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, while Maya scanned the road ahead. As they approached the center of the bridge, Mia gasped. "Sam, stop the car," she exclaimed, pointing toward the edge of the bridge. Sam slammed on the brakes, the car skidding slightly before coming to a halt. In the beam of their headlights, they saw a man standing dangerously close to the edge, his silhouette hunched against the wind. He appeared to be trying to pull something from the icy waters below. The couple exchanged worried glances. "What's he doing out here?" Sam muttered. Without waiting for an answer, he threw on his coat and stepped out of the car, Mia close behind. "Sir, are you okay?" Sam called out as they approached. The man turned, his face pale and etched with panic. "There's a car in the water," he said, his voice trembling. "It skidded off the road. I think there's someone inside." Mia's heart raced. "We have to call for help." "I already did," the man replied, gesturing toward his phone. "But they said the storm's slowing them down. I don't think we have much time." Sam peered over the edge of the bridge. Sure enough, the faint outline of a vehicle was visible beneath the ice, its taillights glowing dimly. "We can't wait," he said firmly. "We have to do something now." The icebreakers. Sam quickly assessed the situation. The river's surface was partially frozen, but the car was submerged enough that reaching it would be dangerous. "We need something to break the ice," he said. "I have a tire iron in my trunk," the man offered. Sam nodded. "Good. Bring it. Mia, stay here and call emergency services again. Tell them exactly what's happening." Mia hesitated but knew better than to argue. "Be careful," she whispered, gripping Sam's arm before he turned away. With the tire iron in hand, Sam and the man, who introduced himself as Greg, climbed down the slippery embankment toward the river. The cold was biting, and every step felt treacherous. But they pressed on. When they reached the edge of the ice, they could see movement inside the car. A woman was trapped, pounding on the window with desperate fists. Her cries were faint but audible, muffled by the layers of ice and water. "She's alive," Greg exclaimed, his breath visible in the frigid air. "We need to work fast," Sam said, raising the tire iron. A race against time. Breaking through the ice was grueling. Each swing sent shards flying, but progress was slow. The cold seeped through their gloves and coats, making their fingers numb. Sam glanced at the woman in the car, her movements growing weaker. "We're running out of time," Greg said, his voice strained. Just then, another set of headlights appeared on the bridge. A large truck pulled up, and two burly men jumped out. "Need some help?" one of them shouted. "Yes," Mia yelled from the bridge. "There's a car in the river." The men, brothers named Mark and Jake, grabbed heavy chains and a winch from their truck. Together, they scrambled down to join Sam and Greg. "We'll anchor the car and pull it out," Mark said. "Keep breaking the ice to make a path." With the added help, progress was quicker. Mark and Jake secured the chains to the submerged car, while Sam and Greg continued hacking at the ice. The sounds of the winch and the men's grunts filled the air, mingling with the rising howl of the storm. After what felt like an eternity, the car broke free from the ice and was pulled closer to shore. Sam and Greg worked to pry the door open, their hands raw and shaking. When it finally gave way, they reached inside and carefully pulled the woman out. She was unconscious but breathing, her body limp from the cold. Mia had rushed down by then, wrapping her own coat around the woman and checking for signs of hypothermia. "We need to keep her warm," Maya said urgently, "and we need to get her to a hospital. Fast." The kindness chain. The brothers offered to drive the woman to the nearest hospital in their truck. "Our rig's built for this weather," Jake explained. Sam and Gray helped load her into the warm cab, where Maya stayed to monitor her condition. As the truck sped off, Sam and Greg stood on the shore, catching their breath. The storm had intensified, but the glow of the truck's taillights brought a sense of relief. "You didn't have to stop," Greg said, turning to Sam. "Most people would have kept driving." Sam shook his head. "Neither did you. We're all in this together." Greg smiled faintly. "Yeah, we are. A second chance." At the hospital, the woman, whose name was Emma, slowly regained consciousness. She was overwhelmed with gratitude when she learned how strangers had risked their lives to save her. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched Mia's hand. "I don't even know how to thank you," Emma whispered, her voice hoarse. "You don't have to," Maya replied. "Just promise to pay it forward someday." Over the following days, news of the rescue spread through the community. People were moved by the bravery and selflessness of the group, and it inspired others to perform their own acts of kindness. Ripples of kindness. Weeks later, Emma visited the grocery store where Mia worked, carrying a small bouquet of flowers. She handed them to Mia with a note. "This is for you and your husband," she said. "You didn't just save my life. You reminded me of the good in the world." The note read, "Because of you, I'm alive. I've already started volunteering at a local shelter, helping others who feel trapped in their own storms. Thank you for giving me a second chance." As Mia read the note, tears welled in her eyes. She knew that the chain of kindness they had started that night would continue, touching lives in ways they might never even see. As the storm raged on, Sam, Greg, and the brothers stood by the icy riverbank, reflecting on the intensity of what had just transpired. The adrenaline still coursed through their veins, but the biting cold reminded them of the fragility of life and the warmth of human connection. An unexpected encounter. Before the group could fully catch their breath, a faint noise caught their attention. It was a soft, whimpering sound, barely audible over the howling wind. Sam turned toward the direction of the sound, his eyes squinting against the flurry of snow. "Do you hear that?" he asked, his voice cutting through the storm. Greg nodded, his face growing tense. "Sounds like an animal." Mark and Jake exchanged glances, their weariness replaced by concern. "We should check it out," Jake said, grabbing a flashlight from the truck. The four men trudged through the snow, following the sound. The whimpering grew louder as they approached a cluster of trees near the riverbank. There, huddled beneath a fallen branch, was a small dog, its fur matted with ice and its body trembling violently from the cold. Mia, who had stayed near the bridge, joined them as they reached the dog. "Oh no," she whispered, her heart breaking at the sight. "We can't leave it here." The dog's eyes were wide with fear, but it didn't resist as Mia carefully wrapped it in her scarf. She held the shivering animal close to her chest, its faint breaths warming her skin. "We need to get it somewhere warm," she said urgently. Mark gestured toward his truck. "Bring it with us. The hospital has a vet clinic nearby. They'll know what to do." The journey to safety. The group piled into the truck, with Mia cradling the dog in the back seat. The drive to the hospital was treacherous. Snow piled up on the roads, and visibility was nearly non-existent. But Mark navigated the storm with the same determination he'd shown during the rescue. In the cab, the dog slowly relaxed, its trembling subsiding as it nestled closer to Mia. She stroked its head gently, murmuring soothing words. "You're going to be okay," she said, more to herself than to the dog. When they finally reached the hospital, the dog was taken to the adjacent vet clinic, where the staff immediately began treating it for hypothermia. Meanwhile, Emma was stable and recovering well in the main hospital. The group gathered in the waiting room, exhaustion etched on their faces, but a quiet satisfaction in their hearts. A name and a new start. The vet emerged after an hour, smiling. "The dog's going to be fine," she said. "It's a miracle you found it when you did. A few more hours out there, and it wouldn't have survived." Mia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she said, relief washing over her. The vet hesitated. "We didn't find a collar or any microchip. It's likely a stray. If no one claims it, it'll go to the shelter." Mia's eyes met Sam's. She could see the unspoken question in his gaze. Without hesitation, she nodded. "We'll take it," she said. "It's been through enough. It deserves a home." Sam smiled, pride and love shining in his eyes. "We'll call it Midnight," he said, glancing at the storm outside. "In honor of the night we all came together." The ripple effect. Over the next few days, the story of the Midnight Rescue spread like wildfire. Local news outlets picked up the tale, hailing the group as heroes. But for Sam, Mia, Greg, Mark, and Jake, the real reward was the bonds they had formed that night. Emma, still recovering, made a point to thank each of them personally. She also became an advocate for community safety, raising awareness about the dangers of icy roads and the importance of kindness in crisis situations. As for Midnight, the once shivering stray became the heart of Sam and Mia's home. The dog's playful spirit brought joy to their lives, a constant reminder of the power of compassion and the connections forged in moments of adversity. The lasting impact. Months later, the group reunited at a community event organized in their honor. The theme was Acts of Kindness, and the proceeds were donated to local emergency services and animal shelters. Standing on the stage, Sam spoke to the crowd. "None of us woke up that morning expecting to be heroes," he said. "We were just ordinary people who saw a chance to help. But that's the thing about kindness. It doesn't require a cape or a spotlight. It just requires a willingness to step forward. The audience erupted in applause, their cheers a testament to the truth of his words. As the event concluded, the group looked out at the crowd, their hearts full. They knew that the chain of kindness they had started that snowy night would continue to grow, touching lives in ways they could only imagine. The stranger with the red umbrella. The rain came down in sheets, turning the city streets into rivers of glistening water. The storm had rolled in quickly, catching many by surprise. Crowds of people hurried along the sidewalks, their heads bowed against the downpour, their steps quick and purposeful. Among them was Sarah, a young woman clutching a crumpled paper bag. Inside were all her worldly belongings, a few clothes, a battered journal, and a framed photograph of her parents. She was soaked to the bone, her thin coat offering little protection from the relentless rain. Sarah had been evicted from her apartment 2 days ago. She had tried to hold on to hope, but the weight of her circumstances felt unbearable. With no family to turn to and no place to stay, she wandered the city, searching for shelter and solace. As the rain intensified, Sarah took refuge beneath the awning of a closed bakery. She sank to the ground, her back against the cold, damp wall. The paper bag rested in her lap, the photograph inside pressing against her chest, like a ghost of a memory she couldn't let go. "Is this really it?" she whispered, her voice swallowed by the sound of the rain. She hugged her knees, her breath visible in the chilly air. The red umbrella. Through the veil of rain, a bright splash of color appeared, a red umbrella bobbing against the grayness of the storm. It moved steadily down the street, held by a figure in a dark coat. The umbrella stopped abruptly as its owner noticed Sarah sitting beneath the awning. The figure stepped closer, revealing a man in his late 30s with kind eyes and a face weathered by life. His name was Daniel. He had just finished a long day working as a delivery driver and was on his way home when he spotted Sarah. "Are you all right?" he asked, crouching down to meet her gaze. Sarah flinched at first, unused to kindness from strangers. She hesitated, then shook her head. "I'm fine," she murmured, though her shivering body betrayed her words. Daniel frowned. "You don't look fine," he said gently. "Here." He held out the red umbrella. "Take this. It'll keep you dry." Sarah looked at him in disbelief. "I can't take your umbrella. You'll get wet." Daniel smiled. "I don't mind. I'm almost home anyway." Reluctantly, Sarah took the umbrella. The simple gesture felt strangely overwhelming, and tears welled up in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel noticed the paper bag in her lap and the worn-out shoes on her feet. He didn't want to pry, but something about her reminded him of himself, years ago, when he had hit rock bottom, and someone had extended a hand to help him back up. "Do you have somewhere to go?" he asked, his voice careful. Sarah hesitated, her lips trembling. "No," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "An invitation." Without hesitation, Daniel made a decision. "There's a diner around the corner," he said. "It's warm, and they serve the best coffee in town. Let me buy you a meal." Sarah's instinct was to refuse. Pride, even in her desperate state, made her hesitate. But the emptiness in her stomach won out, and she nodded. The diner was a small, cozy place with fogged-up windows and the aroma of fresh coffee. The waitress greeted Daniel warmly, clearly recognizing him as a regular. "2 coffees, please," he said, guiding Sarah to a booth. "And a bowl of soup for her." As they waited, Sarah felt a warmth she hadn't experienced in months. The kindness of a hot meal and a listening ear made her feel seen for the first time in a long time. Over the course of their meal, she opened up to Daniel, telling him about her struggles and how she had ended up on the streets. Daniel listened intently, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he leaned back in his seat. "I've been where you are," he said. "A few years ago, I lost my job, my home, everything. I was ready to give up, but someone helped me when I least expected it. Now it's my turn to pay it forward." The shelter. Daniel offered to take Sarah to a shelter he knew of, a place that had helped him when he was in need. "It's run by good people," he said. "They'll make sure you have a warm bed and a fresh start." Sarah hesitated. She had heard horror stories about shelters, but something in Daniel's voice reassured her. "Okay," she said quietly. The shelter was a modest building tucked away on a quiet street. As they entered, a woman with a kind smile greeted them. "Welcome," she said. "I'm Maria, the director here. How can we help?" Daniel explained Sarah's situation, and Maria immediately sprang into action. Within minutes, Sarah was given dry clothes, a warm blanket, and a room of her own. Tears streamed down her face as she realized she would finally have a safe place to sleep. Daniel stayed until he was sure she was settled. Before he left, he handed her a slip of paper. "This is my number," he said. "If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to call." Sarah clutched the paper tightly, her voice breaking. "Thank you," she said. "I don't know how to repay you." "You don't have to," Daniel replied with a smile. "Just promise to help someone else when you can." A new chapter. In the weeks that followed, Sarah began to rebuild her life. The shelter connected her with job training programs and counseling services. She found work at a local bookstore, where her love for reading blossomed into a newfound confidence. One day, while walking home from work, Sarah saw a man huddled on a bench, shivering in the cold. He reminded her of herself on that rainy night. Without a second thought, she approached him, offering her scarf and a warm meal. The man looked up at her with tearful eyes, and in that moment, Sarah understood the true power of kindness, a chain that continued to grow with each act, no matter how small. The ripple effect. Months later, Sarah returned to the diner where she had first met Daniel. This time, she was the one holding a bright red umbrella. She left it with the waitress, along with a note. "This umbrella changed my life. Pass it on to someone who needs it." The waitress smiled as she read the note, her heart warmed by the simple gesture. The red umbrella became a symbol of hope, traveling from hand to hand, spreading kindness throughout the city. And so, the chain of compassion that began with Daniel's small act continued, touching lives in ways he and Sarah could never have imagined. The shelter's community. Sarah settled into the shelter with the help of Maria and the staff. Each morning, the residents gathered in the communal dining area for breakfast, a simple meal of oatmeal and toast, but it carried a sense of warmth and togetherness. Sarah quickly discovered the stories behind the faces she passed in the halls, stories of hardship, resilience, and hope. There was Max, a retired veteran who had fallen on hard times, and Denise, a single mother with 2 little girls who loved to draw. The children often giggled as they played near the windows, their crayons transforming blank sheets of paper into colorful masterpieces. Though their situations were far from perfect, the shelter provided a glimmer of stability. Sarah was inspired by the resilience of her fellow residents and began to take part in the daily activities the shelter offered. Job workshops, therapy sessions, and volunteer opportunities became part of her routine. Slowly, she felt a spark of hope reignite within her, a belief that life could change for the better. A chance encounter. One particularly cold evening, Sarah was in the common room, helping Denise's daughters with their art projects. As the girls colored, Maria approached Sarah with a thoughtful expression. "There's a community cleanup event tomorrow," Maria said. "It's a chance to give back to the neighborhood and meet people. I think it would be good for you." Sarah hesitated but nodded. "I'll go," she said, surprising herself. She had spent so long feeling invisible that the idea of connecting with others felt daunting but exciting. The next morning, bundled in donated coats and scarves, Sarah and several other shelter residents joined the cleanup crew at a local park. Volunteers raked leaves, picked up litter, and planted flowers in the frosty ground. Among them was a familiar figure, Daniel. Sarah's face lit up when she spotted him, and she hurried over. "Daniel," she called. He turned, his eyes widening in recognition. "Sarah, look at you. You're glowing." "I'm doing better," she said. smiling. "Thanks to you." Daniel beamed, and they spent the rest of the morning working side by side, sharing updates. Sarah told him about her new job at the bookstore and how she'd started saving for her own apartment. Daniel shared that he had been volunteering more, inspired by the chain of kindness they had started together. The Red Umbrella's journey. As they worked, Daniel noticed Sarah carrying a red umbrella, the same one he had given her that rainy night. It was now slightly faded, but it still stood out against the gray sky. "I see you kept it," he said, nodding toward the umbrella. Sarah grinned. "Actually, I've passed it on. A young woman at the shelter was having a hard time, and it reminded me of how you helped me. I gave her the umbrella with the same promise you made me give, to help someone else when she could." Daniel's eyes glistened. And so, the chain continues. They finished the day with a sense of accomplishment. The park transformed into a cleaner, brighter space. As the volunteers gathered for hot cocoa provided by the organizers, Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude for the connection she had made and the path she was now on. A step toward independence. The following weeks brought more milestones for Sarah. With Maria's guidance, she applied for subsidized housing and was approved for a small studio apartment. Moving day was emotional. She hugged Maria tightly, thanking her for the support and guidance that had given her a fresh start. The apartment was modest but cozy, with sunlight streaming through the windows. Sarah decorated it with simple items from thrift stores and a few handmade crafts from Denise's daughters. On the kitchen counter sat a new red umbrella, a gift from Maria, symbolizing the kindness that had carried Sarah through her darkest moments. One evening, Sarah found herself reflecting on the people who had helped her. Daniel's generosity, Maria's unwavering support, and the shelter's sense of community had all played a role in her journey. She decided it was time to give back in a meaningful way. A ripple of kindness. Sarah began volunteering at the shelter on weekends, sharing her story with new residents and offering hope to those who felt lost. She brought books from the store where she worked, creating a small library in the shelter's common room. The residents, especially the children, flocked to the shelves, their laughter filling the space. Her favorite part of volunteering was the kindness chain activity she introduced. Each resident wrote down an act of kindness they had experienced or wanted to perform, and the notes were pinned to a large bulletin board. Over time, the board became a colorful tapestry of hope and compassion, a testament to the power of small gestures. An unexpected reunion. One afternoon, while Sarah was restocking the shelter's library, a young woman entered, clutching the red umbrella Sarah had passed on weeks earlier. The woman looked nervous but determined. "Are you Sarah?" she asked, her voice trembling. Sarah nodded. "Yes, that's me. How can I help you?" The woman smiled, her eyes filling with tears. "You already have. Someone gave me this umbrella and told me it belonged to you. It got me through a really rough time. I just wanted to say thank you." Overwhelmed, Sarah hugged the woman. "I'm so glad it helped," she said. "But remember, it's not just about the umbrella. It's about what you do with the kindness you've received. Pass it on." The woman nodded, clutching the umbrella tightly. "I will." As the woman left, Sarah felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The red umbrella had become more than just an object. It was a symbol of resilience, hope, and the enduring power of human connection. The red umbrella's legacy. Months later, Sarah stood in her now cozy apartment, looking out at the rain. The red umbrella sat by the door, ready for its next journey. She knew she couldn't predict where life would take her, but one thing was certain: kindness, like the umbrella, would continue to travel, touching lives and inspiring change. The little boy and the empty lunchbox. The morning sun cast a golden glow over Lincoln Elementary School as the bell rang, signaling the start of the day. Children ran across the playground, their laughter filling the air, while parents waved goodbye from the parking lot. Among the bustling crowd was Tommy, a quiet 7-year-old with sandy hair and large, curious eyes. Tommy wasn't like most of the other kids. His clothes were hand-me-downs that didn't quite fit, his shoes scuffed and worn. He walked with his head slightly down, clutching his tattered backpack as if it were a shield against the world. Inside that backpack was a secret he hoped no one would discover: an empty lunchbox. Tommy's family had fallen on hard times. His dad, once a factory worker, had been laid off months ago, and his mom worked long hours cleaning houses just to keep the lights on. Most days, there wasn't enough food for everyone, so Tommy often skipped lunch without complaint. He didn't want to burden his parents with yet another worry. As he walked into his classroom, Tommy kept his lunchbox hidden at the bottom of his backpack, just as he did every day. When lunchtime came, he planned to sit quietly at the edge of the cafeteria, pretending he wasn't hungry. A caring friend. Tommy's best friend, Jamie, was a bubbly boy with a big personality. Jamie always had a way of making people laugh, even on the toughest days. But Jamie had also noticed something. Tommy never seemed to eat during lunch. "Hey, Tommy," Jamie said that morning, nudging him with an elbow. "What's in your lunchbox today?" Tommy hesitated, his cheeks flushing. "Nothing special," he mumbled, trying to change the subject. But Jamie wasn't convinced. At lunchtime, as the kids unpacked their meals, Jamie watched Tommy closely. He saw him sit at the far end of the table, staring at his empty hands while the other kids unwrapped sandwiches and snacks. Jamie frowned. Something wasn't right. The next day, Jamie decided to act. He packed an extra sandwich and slipped it into his lunchbox before heading to school. When lunchtime arrived, Jamie walked over to Tommy's usual spot. "Hey, I made too much lunch today," Jamie said casually, holding out the sandwich. "Want half?" Tommy looked up, startled. "I can't take your food," he said quickly, shaking his head. "Why not?" "I'm full, and it's just going to go to waste," Jamie replied with a grin. After a moment's hesitation, Tommy accepted the sandwich, his hands trembling slightly. "Thanks," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Jamie smiled. "What are friends for?" The chain reaction. Word spread quickly among the kids in Tommy's class. Jamie, being the outspoken boy he was, shared his plan with a few close friends. "Tommy doesn't have enough food," he explained, "so let's help him out." The next day, another classmate, Sarah, brought an extra juice box. "Hey, Tommy," she said, sliding it across the table. "I don't like grape juice. Want it?" Tommy hesitated, his face red with embarrassment, but Sarah's kind smile reassured him, and he accepted the juice. Soon, other kids joined in. One brought an apple, another a granola bar. It wasn't long before Tommy's lunch tray was full, thanks to the small but meaningful contributions of his classmates. A teacher's observations. Mrs. Carter, the class teacher, noticed the quiet acts of kindness happening in her classroom. One day, she pulled Jamie aside. "I've seen what you and the others are doing for Tommy," she said softly. "That's a wonderful thing." Jamie shrugged, trying to downplay it. "He's my friend. I don't want him to feel left out." Mrs. Carter smiled, her eyes glistening. "You're teaching all of us a valuable lesson." Inspired by her students, Mrs. Carter decided to take action. She reached out to the school's administration and explained the situation. Together, they organized a Lunchbox Love program, where anonymous donations of food were collected and discreetly distributed to students in need. Within weeks, the program expanded, helping not just Tommy but several other children in the school. Parents began contributing snacks and sandwiches, and local businesses donated supplies. The cafeteria staff even started preparing extra meals to ensure no child went hungry. Tommy's gratitude. For the first time in months, Tommy felt a sense of belonging. He no longer dreaded lunchtime, and the weight of his empty lunchbox no longer haunted him. But what touched him the most was the kindness of his classmates, who had gone out of their way to make him feel cared for. One afternoon, Tommy stayed behind after class to talk to Mrs. Carter. "Can I do something to say thank you?" he asked, his voice timid but earnest. Mrs. Carter thought for a moment. Why don't you write a letter? Sometimes words can mean more than anything else. That night, Tommy worked hard on his letter. He poured his heart into every sentence, expressing his gratitude not just to Jamie, but to all the kids who had helped him. He even included a small drawing of his class, each person holding hands. The next day, Mrs. Carter read the letter aloud during morning circle time. By the end, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The ripple effect. Tommy's letter sparked something larger. Parents who heard about the story began volunteering at the school, helping with the Lunchbox Love program, and organizing food drives. The program grew beyond Lincoln Elementary, reaching neighboring schools and becoming a model for kindness and community support. Jamie, proud but humble, shrugged off the attention. "We just helped a friend," he said simply. But for Tommy, the impact was life-changing. The kindness he received gave him confidence and hope. He started participating more in class, making new friends, and even joining the school's art club. Years later, Tommy would look back on those days as a turning point in his life. Inspired by the kindness of others, he grew up to become a teacher, dedicating his career to helping children in need. A lesson for everyone. At the end of the school year, Mrs. Carter addressed her class one final time. "This year, you've all shown me what it means to care for one another," she said. "Kindness isn't about big gestures. It's about the little things we do every day that make a difference." The students cheered, their faces glowing with pride. As they packed up their desks and headed out for summer break, Tommy looked at Jamie and smiled. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." Jamie grinned. "You'd do the same for me." And with that, the two friends walked out into the sunlight, ready to carry their lesson in kindness wherever life would take them. The midnight fire and the chain of courage. The clock struck midnight, and the small neighborhood lay blanketed in quiet. Rows of modest houses sat in orderly lines, their windows glowing faintly with the last flickers of light as families drifted to sleep. Among them was an elderly widow named Eleanor, who lived alone in a quaint but aging home at the corner of Elm Street. Eleanor's house had once been lively with the chatter of her children and the laughter of her late husband. But now, it was just her and her memories. She had lived in the house for over 50 years, and though time had worn it down, it remained her sanctuary. Tonight, however, a tragedy was waiting to unfold. The spark that ignited. Around 12:30 a.m., Eleanor stirred in her bed, awakened by the faint scent of smoke. At first, she thought she might be imagining things. But then she heard a crackling sound, a noise that made her heart drop. She sat up, her frail frame trembling, and saw flickering orange light outside her bedroom door. "Fire," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing roar of flames. The fire had started in the kitchen, likely from an old faulty wire. Now it was spreading rapidly, devouring everything in its path. Eleanor grabbed her cane and tried to make her way to the front door, but the heat and smoke overwhelmed her. She collapsed onto the floor, coughing and gasping for air. The boy who saw the flames. Across the street, 13-year-old Malik was still awake, his room glowing faintly from his desk lamp. He was working on a school project when something caught his eye, a flicker of light through his window. At first, he thought it was just car headlights, but when he looked closer, his heart raced. Eleanor's house was on fire. Without a second thought, Malik bolted out of his room and into the living room, where his parents were watching TV. "Mom, Dad, Eleanor's house is on fire," he shouted. His parents sprang into action. Malik's father, a former firefighter, grabbed the fire extinguisher they kept in the garage, while his mother called 911. Malik didn't wait for instructions. He ran outside, his bare feet slapping against the cold pavement. The rescue begins. As Malik approached Eleanor's house, he could feel the heat radiating from the flames. Smoke billowed out of the windows, and the fire crackled menacingly. He knew he couldn't go in alone, but he also couldn't stand there and do nothing. "Eleanor, can you hear me?" he shouted, cupping his hands around his mouth. A faint cough answered him, followed by a weak voice. "Help! I'm here." Malik's heart pounded. He ran back to his father, who had just arrived with the fire extinguisher. "She's inside. We have to get her out," Malik pleaded. His father nodded grimly. "Stay behind me. We'll do this together." Using the fire extinguisher to create a temporary path through the flames, they entered the house. Malik held onto his father's shirt, his eyes stinging from the smoke. They found Eleanor lying on the floor near the hallway, her face pale and her breathing shallow. "Malik, grab her legs," his father instructed. Together, they carefully lifted Eleanor and carried her outside, where Malik's mother was waiting with a blanket. As soon as they were clear of the house, the fire roared louder, the roof beginning to collapse. Moments later, the fire truck arrived, and firefighters worked quickly to contain the blaze. A community rises. The next morning, the neighborhood gathered near the charred remains of Eleanor's house. The fire had destroyed nearly everything she owned, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back. Yet she was alive, and that was what mattered most. News of Malik's bravery spread quickly. Neighbors approached him with pats on the back and words of praise, but Malik felt uneasy about the attention. "I just did what anyone would have done," he said, shrugging. Eleanor, however, was not shy about expressing her gratitude. Holding Malik's hand in her frail one, she said, "You saved my life, young man. I'll never forget what you and your family did for me." Inspired by Malik's courage, the community decided to come together to help Eleanor rebuild her life. Within days, donations began pouring in: clothes, furniture, groceries, and even money to help her start over. The local hardware store donated materials to repair the damaged parts of her house, and neighbors volunteered their time and skills to do the work. The ripple effect. Malik's actions had sparked something profound, a chain reaction of kindness and generosity. People who barely knew each other before now worked side by side, painting walls, installing new flooring, and replacing Eleanor's lost belongings. One of the volunteers, a man named Carlos, was particularly moved by the experience. "You know," he said to Malik one afternoon, "this neighborhood needed something like this. We've all been so caught up in our own lives, but this reminded me how important it is to look out for each other." Malik smiled shyly. "I just wanted to help." Carlos nodded. "And you did. More than you know." Eleanor's new beginning. By the end of the month, Eleanor's house was not only repaired but transformed. The once aging structure now stood strong and beautiful, a symbol of resilience and the power of community. On the day she moved back in, Eleanor held a small gathering to thank everyone who had helped her. As neighbors filled her living room, she stood with tears in her eyes. "I've lived here for over 50 years, she said, her voice trembling. "And I've always believed in the goodness of people. But what you've all done for me, it's more than I could have ever imagined. Thank you." Malik stood in the corner, trying to avoid the spotlight. But Eleanor wouldn't let him. She walked over to him and handed him a small box. Inside was a medal, a keepsake from her late husband, who had been a war hero. "You're my hero, Malik," she said, placing the medal in his hands. "This belongs to you now." The legacy of courage. Malik's bravery and the community's response became a story that spread beyond their neighborhood. Local news outlets featured their efforts, and other communities were inspired to organize their own acts of kindness. Eleanor's house became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is light to be found in the kindness of others. Years later, Malik would look back on that night as a turning point in his life. The experience shaped his dreams and aspirations, leading him to become a firefighter, just like his father. He carried Eleanor's medal with him on every shift, a reminder of the power of courage and compassion. And in a quiet corner of Elm Street, Eleanor lived out her days surrounded by the warmth and love of a community that had come together to save her, not just from a fire, but from the isolation she had felt for so long.